Hi, everyone. Welcome to Poet. I'm Radha Marcum, and today I have the pleasure of talking to poet Kyce Bello, author of Far Country. Before I introduce you to Kyce, I'd like to invite you to become a subscriber of the Poet to Poet newsletter on Substack if you aren't already. Just go to poettopoet.substack.com and you can subscribe for free. In it, you'll find interviews like this one, plus helpful ideas on writing and publishing books of poetry. So today I am thrilled to introduce you to Kyce Bello. She is a certified clinical herbalist and registered nurse and holds an interdisciplinary degree in Southwest Studies and creative writing from the University of New Mexico. She earned an MFA in poetry from the Institute of American Indian Arts, and her debut poetry collection, Refugia, was the winner of the Interim's Test Site Poetry Series. She was published which was published by the University of Nevada Press, and it received a New Mexico Arizona Book Award in 2020. Her second poetry collection, Far Country, which we're going to discuss today, was released in March of 2025, also by the University of Nevada Press. And she is also the editor of the award-winning anthology, The Return of the River: Writers, Scholars, and Citizens Speak on Behalf of the Santa Fe River, a work of literary activism. Along with her husband, she raises two daughters in Santa Fe. So, Kais, it's a delight to welcome you to Poet to Poet.
Thank you. It is a delight to join you.
So, I would love to start with this beautiful book's central theme, which is how loss is a medium for deepening connection. I'm curious, did you write toward that theme, or did you discover it by looking back at the poems you'd written?
Great question. I would say I was completely filled with this question of how do we survive these times? How can I survive the essentially the season of devastation? And my first book, Refugia, kind of looks head on at the changing landscape, particularly like conifers in the West. It's exploring this. There was some research that came out that there would be no more conifers by the end of the century in New Mexico, my home. So it was reckoning with that, and it was reckoning with what survival looks like. The word refers to places that survive, like where plant and animal species can survive big climatic shifts, whether it was in the ice ages or right now in our times. And the first poems in Far Country, actually, Far Country is a sequence within the book, I think came directly out of the writing of Refugia. They were born while I was waiting for the book to be published. And I think it was pointing me towards that sense of change, of loss, and of remaining so rooted and grounded in the experience as it was unfolding. Like we can navigate anything if we are aware and connected to our grief, to our hearts, to the earth and to each other. And as I found, to poetry, to the creative medium became the absolute vessel that carried me through. Um, I didn't really realize the extent to which that was true until this book came out. And I realized something very surprising, which is that anyone who asked me what the book was about, I would say it's about death, it's about loss, it's about going into the underworld. But what I realized, and I don't know why I didn't know it while I was writing, because the book is filled with things about healing. It's filled with medicine and herbs and love and stories. And I would say that is actually the central theme of the book. That is what it contained. Actually, the first, I mean, so many lines in the poems point to that. The first poem ends with, let's ask what the shells of the dead hold inside of them, something like that. Misquoting myself. But what the kernel of life that change and loss carries with it. And also within that, I think there's a deepening personal relationship to loss and connection that becomes really vivid in this book, in which I'm no longer just navigating as if it's not enough kind of collective and earth related changes and losses, but it came home in very personal ways in my own life and in my immediate relationships on many levels. And I feel this deeper kinship actually with the earth, knowing that the earth is experiencing loss and change as I too am. So my connection with the earth became even more important, or like being able to feel linked in that way.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I think those of us in the West who have a familiarity with the New Mexico landscape will feel the impact of that, that statement that the conifers will be gone. The pinyon tree is widespread spread through that region and really sort of y- you know, it's a species that you can't imagine um, being erased from that landscape. So,
And in fact, that research points to conifers all through the Rocky Mountains and all the way up through the Oregon, Washington coast. So we're all facing it, I think,
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah. We're living in future ghost forests.
yeah, yes. Would you like to read a poem, maybe to give listeners slash viewers slash readers a little taste?
Thank you. Yes, I would love to. Um, this one spoke to me today. It was written after the pandemic and or during, which as a nurse, I was also pretty struck by because I saw for the first time the extent to which what I was seeing in the environment was impacting human communities. And I realized, oh, it's not just the trees and the conifers that are going to be impacted by climate change, it's human communities. And so witnessing firsthand those losses was a tremendously impactful time. This poem is not about it directly, but it was written out of that. And I wanted to just bring it in because things are feeling, similarly cataclysmic at the moment and big.
Mm,
And it was inspired by a story in the New York Times about these kind of survivalists, not like preppers, but like people in, I think they were up in Oregon, who were just learning how to, flint knap and hunt and like all primitive skills. And I was really struck by their story.
mm,
It's called The Thin Line. In an encampment in the forest, a hunter napping arrowheads says, "There is a hole where elders used to be." The thin line of honking birds overhead could be geese, but are sandhill cranes, and I gauge whom to trust by who can tell the difference. At their compound, the hunters sleep under bark and pine boughs. They don't have zippers or guns. They say that needing each other and being needed is better even than a grocery store. At night, they hold hands beneath the black cauldron swirling milky stars and think how once each was named and how now, or sometime soon enough, when we've forgotten what to call them, they can be named again. They dream upon fern beds that soften the night. One hears rocks singing. One sees a deer turning its head in the rising mist. One follows.
mm. It's beautiful. So you can hear in that poem a little of this technique or approach that's all throughout the book, which is that landscape and language are sort of,
Mm.
as you described, layered into vivid sequences. Could you talk a little bit about your approach to that layering? I mean, do poems arrive already interwoven, or did various connections between elements emerge sometime during your process of putting the poems and or the book together?
Yes. Okay, indulge me for 1 second. I'm going to give you my central like idea, my animating idea as a poet. This is like my one craft talk in one sentence, which is that the earth is the original poem and it speaks in image. And um, that is kind of always with me. And I didn't know that for a long time, but I was writing towards it. Um, I don't know what to say except for that my entire sense of self and my imagination is completely rooted in this landscape. It is inseparable. I apprenticed with an herbalist when I was 16 years old, and the plants, like, I'm not naming these plants out of like, I'm going to be cool and put down some, lists of species. It's like they're friends. I have relationships with them. And they inspire me to no end. Like those are the keys. I write, I mean, endlessly about keys in this book. And they are the keys that open these doors into what I call the field, or like you could call it the imaginal realm, the places in which um, where landscape and language are kind of one. Like it's imagination, it's the collective, it's the mythic consciousness, whatever. It's the poem that is always we're inside of, right? So I guess I just can't help but write place and the images of it into relationship, into, I mean, I am not a narrative poet. I started out as one, and I certainly plan to be one. And then my MFA changed everything. And it's not on purpose. I'm not trying to be, mysterious in any way, but I do believe there's a narrative thread always. Like you, in every poem, you are anchored in an experience to which, as a reader, you can relate and identify and place yourself. There's always a sense of connection, I think. And maybe the land opens the door to that. But then the language itself is the means by which all this is possible. And I actually love narrative. I'm writing stories right now. I started out actually as a, fiction writer, and then I moved into poetry and further from narrative. And I'm writing fiction, and it's incredible. It's so fun, and it's so like filled with gravity. It's so grounded, and it's like you're on one dimension. And poetry, it's like interdimensional. You're going at all the different registers at once, and it's just extraordinary. It's, and conducting an orchestra and moving between my kitchen table and the concrete world and these whatever snatches of inspiration. So I just go for it. I just listen. And in this book, I felt much freer to do that. I really just kind of let myself go a little bit more. And it feels closer to an authentic voice and less of a carefully controlled, crafted voice,
Mm.
which my first book, which I love my first book to pieces. I'm like, this is who wrote this? Like, this is incredible work. Far Country, I'll just be honest with all the poet to poets out there. This is it, poet to poet. It's imperfect. Like I look at it, I'm like, that was some interesting choices. But without those risks, I don't think I would have been able to achieve what it did do, which was, I mean, it was a healing process to write. Like something much more than, writing poems for the sake of poems happened. And I hope very much that that can reach people who are reading it too.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, there's probably a dozen follow-up questions that I have just based on your answer because that's such a incredible description of your approach, your process, your philosophy, your way of being in the world, which I think we can't always, it's hard to articulate sometimes. You've articulated it beautifully, but that sense that the way we live our lives is the way poems are
Mhm.
born or you can't separate that.
Radha, have you ever had the experience when you're just really in a flow with your writing where it just everything becomes so luminously lit around you, like just you know, every possible moment in a day becoming like I am inside of this exquisite poem, and it takes, I have to be really deep in the writing to be like, whoa, this is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it does feel like you're accessing experience on, I it gets hard to talk about, right? But it's a way of experiencing everything around you in a heightened or to your point, a more connected, more open um
Yeah.
approach. Yeah. Um, one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking is this notion of, when we're writing about landscapes, when we're writing about ecological themes, how does one um, both stand in the poem as a singular mind being experiencer, but also honor that fact that, as you said, the landscape is inseparable. It's inseparable from that process. And I kind of think about it as the difference between writing about something, right? So having a subject matter that's over here, and here I am as the writer, with this nice distance, and writing with something, right? And to me, it feels like Far Country is writing with, almost collaborative with
Mm-hmm.
uh, the elements that come through the poems. Um, so I think that's just
Yeah.
incredible.
Yes. I know such incredible, smart eco poets who talk about, displacing the speaker and the self and the human experience. And I'm not consciously doing any of that, but I do think very much there's a very round table effect going on. Like nothing is privileged really over anything else. Um, I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Would you like to read another
Mhm.
poem, maybe that
Yeah.
touches on some of the, I mean, the whole book touches on that. So,
Oh boy, touches on some of what? Let's see. Yeah. Hmm. Well, the last poems that I wrote for this book were this long sequence called Walk in the Nambe Badlands, which is interspersed throughout. And I have a similar thing happened in my first book at the end. And it's kind of this moment where I'm like, I see the book is done because this final like piece just locks in. And to me, it's a very narrative sequence in some ways that moves through everything else. It's like moving through all the different worlds. And so this is one of the poems from that. It's about one walk that I took, and yet years, lifetimes, many, many different things are happening all at once in it. Walk in the Nambe Badlands when snow begins to fall. Snow meets the earth, hiding the path, my tracks, the scent of where I stand in the story. The landscape as a crinkled page, and these footprints are the first to write everything I have spoken. Dreams raise strangeness from the depths and give it to us for company. The snake with wings, the charging bull with no back legs, the oddness that prophesies and opens the way for what shall happen next. Like keys that have not yet found a lock, or these many locks for which there is no key, and these doors behind which there is no room. The sky is heavy overhead, a third house with open windows.
mm, I need to sit with all of those images.
I know.
you know but there's such a powerful juxtaposition happening in those, and I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, that sort of odd juxtaposition is the position that we find ourselves in on a daily basis, when
Mm,
the things that we hear and the things that we see don't align exactly with the experience that might be considered more expected.
yeah,
um, so I think that sparks something in me that feels true.
that's good. Wonderful.
Um, so I'm curious, in terms of the writing process for this book versus uh, other works, your first book, and then maybe this would relate to the anthology too. But how do you feel that you've developed as a writer, from
Mm,
book to book, and maybe in addition to that, what's kept you motivated and anchored during, challenging parts of the writing process, whether that's because of the topics you were taking on, or because of some challenge in
mm,
just the process itself?
yeah. Well, I have to give a shout out to the challenging times because they are very fruitful for poetry, I think. They definitely call forth in me, and I'm sure many of us, that need to respond or to tap in. And I would say that has been the most consistent piece throughout my writing since I was, in my 20, since I was in my teens, maybe, but certainly early days of writing stories and starting to move into poetry, which happened when I had children and basically just didn't have time anymore to work for hours and days and months. Of course, I didn't realize poetry would take hours and hours and days and months. But and it was very new. It was very foreign. I was very much attached to stories, to fiction, to nonfiction, and was sure that's what I would be doing. And so there's just been a practice of doing it and seeing what happens and really allowing myself to be taught, like apprentice to the page and not reject anything that comes, really allowing everything to have its place. And I look back at some of my earliest work and I just am in awe. I'm like, these are such exquisite poems. And the sense of truth and authenticity, um, they're they're very precious to me and they won't be published. And that's great. When my first book really did grow out of my MFA, and I remember a visiting speaker there who was a playwright said, any of y'all who want to actually do this, especially you poets, you're gonna have to work as hard or harder as if you're training to get drafted into the NFL. And I took that very much to heart, and I worked very hard, very, very dedicated for a number of years on that first book. And I just feel very strongly that when you bring yourself with devotion to your practice as a writer, you are rewarded with astonishing riches. Like if you show up and you write I'm not going to say anything's bad or good, but you might be disappointed with what you write or not sure about it. But if you keep coming, it just, it's just, it's like an ocean bringing better and better shells to you once you start searching.
Mhm.
And I guess so allowing what comes to be what it is. Like I'm not sure how to describe it, but there's a lot of different kinds of poems in here. I think you could pick them all out as a Kyce Bello poem, but there are really fragmented and image-based sequences, and you're like, what world am I in? And then there's very concrete ones, and I am drawn to sequences. I write a lot of longer poems, and I do that in part because I want to explore one kind of gesture or mood or experience in as many different ways as possible with as many different kinds of language. The direct point of view and like the completely ethereal, sublime, like so the poetry itself has taught me how to listen to it and how to bring it to the page. And every year I wipe my slate clean. I take summers off pretty much from writing and because my family's all home from school, my husband's a teacher, and we just are in the world. And then I pick it up again in the fall, and it's a new season and it's a new time.
Mm.
And as I've grown, as the time has passed, I should say, I feel less and less effortful. Like I'm not trying in the same way I once did. And I'm seeking almost more simplicity, more just more immediate connection with language. And it's surprising.
Mm.
It's different.
Mm.
So I don't know what the future will hold, but
Mhm. Yeah.
it's it'll come.
Well, I like what you said about devotion, right? There's this sense of the hard work of it, on the page, but also that hard work over time, right? The
Mhm.
cumulative effect of sitting down and doing the practice. And
Yeah.
I get questions quite often about, well, are you so when I advocate for, well, you have to have a good body of work before you put together a collection, and it's gotta, have these things going for it, right? And then people will mishear it as, well, you're just advocating for me to write a lot, volume wise. And I'm like, well, no,
Oh,
no, 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 I'm not saying that, but it's gotta be quality and quantity together,
Mm,
and I'm not advocating for writing for no purpose, but I think that's the aspiration to get to the point
yeah,
where it's a devotional um,
yeah.
part of the rhythm of life. And I love the way that you lay it out in terms of seasons or, the yearly cycle and how
And
that works.
I want to add to that, like the best poems that I will write in that year are going to be at the end. Actually, February is prime time. I call that like the sap rising season. And it's
Mhm.
only because I've been sitting there. It's like giving birth. You're laboring and you're laboring and you're spinning wheels and you're not sure if anything's going to happen. And I've noticed this pattern with my creativity on a daily, like when I sit down for a day's work, spinning wheels, trying, and then something comes. At the end of the week of doing that, something more comes. At the end of a year or a season of doing that, a lot has come.
Mhm.
And I'm usually rewarded by continuing. And I would say if someone thinks they have finished their book, they probably have their best poems yet ahead of them. And they're probably actually just beginning to really enter it. Maybe, potentially. And they will continue to write even, I mean, the next book opens into the next and the next. So we never are really done writing.
No, yes.
Um,
Just to put, some some numbers to all of this, how many years did it take for each of your
mm,
books? And
mm.
how many poems do you estimate you wrote? Um, what was the pile? How many did you pull out of, was it a stack of, 300 poems and
Yeah.
50 made it?
Great questions. One thing I have really good data on is how many drafts the entire manuscript went through, because you know, I basically create new versions of it as I'm developing. And
Hmm.
so with Far Country, I know there are 56 different numbered versions of this book.
Hmm.
There were probably others before. Um, and so I started working on it before my first book came out, so 2018,
Hmm.
until last year, 2025.
Hmm.
And some of the poems were written in 2018 and some were written in 2024 and a half, right before publication.
Hmm.
And when I went back in preparation for this conversation, I looked at like draft 2 and 5 of the manuscript and I was like, oh, I love, this is so sweet. Like, why didn't I keep that way? And, it's like you can't go back in evolution once you've begun moving. But what I did see is that essentially another unpublished manuscript split off from it. And that I had been originally merging a larger body of work that I guess grew too big. And I had to kind of discern, okay, what's in Far Country and what is this other piece? So that's there, just still waiting in the wings, doing its own evolution right now.
Hmm.
Um,
A little bit like making bread, and you've got the starter,
yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
the
Take them
starter's doing
off.
its thing, and then it becomes one thing, and then, maybe you're still stuck with a jar full of starter for
Yeah,
something
yeah.
else. But,
Thankfully.
but that other thing is still growing,
Yeah.
somewhere in the background. So I love the way
Yes.
there's sort of these simultaneous, bodies of work that can be bubbling up at the
And
same
I
time.
certainly, I am someone for whom it's very easy to develop work. Like a single poem can go through 15 drafts in the first week of its creation. And I don't hold on to things. I don't think it's done quickly. And same with the books. Like I just keep going. And honestly, I would keep going endlessly if they weren't published. So there's not really an end point. You just kind of have to put the pin in and say, here we go.
What gave you the confidence to put the pin in it?
I got accepted. I had a publishing deal. So that was the end. And before that, I don't know how other people do it, Rod. I'm sure you have so many poets you work with and have a very good strategy that I probably would have benefited from. But I send my work out from early stages. I think it's done early on, right? I'm like, oh, I've been working on this. I have 70 pages of poetry. I'm going to send it out. And I do. And I consider that a very valuable part of my process because each time I send it out, I actually continue to work on it and evolve it, and it improves magnificently. I'm like, each $30 entry fee is like a semester long, mentorship with a writer, like in terms of how much the manuscript carries forward. So that's at least the way I do it. I am for better or for worse. Um,
I think that's not uncommon. When I ask this question of other people, I think those who cross the finish line are those who are willing to put it out there. Maybe slightly before it's quote unquote ready,
mhm.
because there is something valuable in doing the work to collect the body of work. And then you understand the body of work better, right?
Yeah.
And then every iteration after that, like you're describing, it becomes more
Yeah.
and more its essential
Hmm.
self.
Hopefully. Yeah. And there's losses along the way. I mean, there are changes. I look back, I'm like, oh, that one poem or that line, the line about Thich Nhat Hanh, why did I take that out?
Yeah,
Little things like
yeah,
that. And it's okay. It's in
yeah,
the white space
yeah.
of the larger
Yeah,
word.
there's a beautiful quote from Ocean Vuong about one of his books, just essentially saying, it's never done. A book
Mm,
is never done. It's a snapshot in time of where that work was. And you, as a writer, are growing all the time. So, of course, you're going to look at the poems differently, coming back to them. So, I think there is an element of just having to be at peace at
yeah.
some point with what's out there. But yeah, no, I think this one definitely feels like it's in its ideal state.
It's in a beautiful state. I am very grateful that it came into the world and that it exists. And yeah.
Um, so would you like to read maybe one more poem, and then I have a couple last questions
Mm.
to pose.
Mm. Let's see if we can find something different. I'm like, how difficult shall we be, or how? Hmm. Sorry, I should have things. Oh, I know what I can read. Um, so again, this book moves through, I feel like it's kind of starts it actually is never really in the known world. It's always in a sort of liminal state, a far country, but it starts in the recognizable world and then it moves very much internally and comes back out. And this is one of them from a sequence called The Boneyard, and it's called Walk in Darkness. I don't have the map. I don't have the book, the key, or the cup. I have a blanket and wrap it around our shoulders. Day after day, wounds are opened and cleansed, dressed in fresh gauze. In another life, I was hers and she was mine. She held my hand and hem. We stretch our arms each morning upon waking, reaching not to grasp something, but to practice bending. I'm asked again what salve to spread on the arm, the face, the bleeding heart. But all I remember from past lives are plagues, not cures.
It's very tender.
Yeah, the she is my daughter, and that sequence is kind of centered around our relationship and her coming of age years. And
Yeah,
it was very tender.
yeah. So I wonder if you might be willing to talk a little bit on the more practical side. How did you approach finding a publisher? And you have the same publisher for
Mhm.
these two books. Um, yeah, tell me a little bit about your approach to publishing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, with the first book, I sent it out 500 times, and then I heard of this contest, the Test Site Poetry Prize, which should be on people's radar because it actually is one of the rare prizes that has a sort of mission, or it has if your book is this, then you will win. And I was like, that's what my book is. So here we go. And it was a brand new prize, and it was like, I wish there was more of that in the world, like more. Well, actually, I'm not sure I do because it's good to not have things categorized. But in this case, it opened a space for my work, which doesn't really have a place otherwise in the larger kind of poetry world. It feels like, it's very tender, it's very ecological, it's very New Mexican, it's very about mothering. Um, those aren't things that I feel like most publishers are looking for. And they were. And I didn't really think of them for the second book for a very long time. I just assumed, they wouldn't want to, or, they published their prize winners and that's it in terms of poetry. But after several years of sending Far Country out and feeling like it was done and could become, could find its way into the world, and that I wanted it to be done so I could move on to other things, I was like, maybe I should just ask them if they'd be interested. And I had this thought of like, wouldn't it be amazing to be nurtured as a poet by, this one place and for them to kind of continue to give me a home to develop. And that was kind of like my deepest heart's longing. Like, I'm sure I'm not worthy of it. I'm sure it will never happen. I'm, not CD right, so forget it. But they were very warm and very welcoming when I queried them. And that's all I can say. But it took several years of me sending it out and trying many other routes prior to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think
And
is very, very true to most poets' experience, and it's lucky to have, like you said, that nurturing. It's funny that you bring up C.D. Wright. One of the things that really sticks in my brain is, uh, her husband, longtime partner, Forrest Gander, mentioned in a workshop that it took CD uh, five publishers before she
Mm,
found one that would stick with her.
wow.
And it really
Okay.
seemed like a thing.
All right. So
Like
I am
like
more like her.
he couldn't believe that it took that many all that relationship building. But I think that is very much the position that we're in, even when I mean, C.D. Wright had that experience. So
That's true.
we're all in good company in that
We
sense.
are. Yeah. And, with this, now it's like a clean slate again. I'm like, oh, yeah, how do I do this? How do I begin to build towards something else? And so I've been taking inspiration from your newsletters and like hunkering down and sending work back out. And like, oh, yeah, this is how we do this. This is how we do poetry community. And
Yeah.
it's back to beginner's mind.
Yeah. I also want to just underscore what you said about finding the publisher that was opening a space for your specific work.
Mm,
I think that is one of the most important ideas that I try to instill every time I talk about publishing is just this. You do have to do some work to find the publisher that is cultivating that conversation that you want to be a part of. But when you do find that publisher, um, it's great.
yeah. And they're certainly out there. There's so many extraordinary small presses right now. And um, yeah, if I could give advice, I mean, I just feel like in this moment in time, like I would tell myself, like, it's okay to go really small. It's okay to go hyper local. Like, it's okay. Like, actually, it's better because you're more rooted in community and connection. And, that's the essence of what this is. And it's easy to lose sight of that because we were thinking so big for so long, like it has to be a certain way. But
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I resonate. I'm going to take that to heart.
and my dream is to start a press. Like that's what I would most love to do someday and be that nurturing place for other writers. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah. So, to close us out, how can people find you, your work? Where can they buy the book?
Yeah, thanks. Well, kycebello.com as my website. And I have the main thing I have there is a very, very infrequent blog that is super old school. I know nobody blogs anymore. But I have really shared some of like just my heart along the way, in terms of inhabiting this life and being a creative person. And occasionally I add to that. In fact, I think I was inspired as I prepared for this. I wrote some notes that will probably become a post. So that blog is on my website, kycebello.com. And, please ask your local bookstores or libraries to find my books. Here they are. If you didn't see them, they're beautiful
Mm.
and they're different and they're highly readable and they're very giveable. Um, so thank you for anyone who explores them and reach out to me, send me a letter, call me up. I'm just a normal person.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Kais, thank you so much for doing this interview. So many insights. I'm going to be, you know, thinking about and really, you know, feeling the impact of a lot of your work for days and probably even years. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a real joy to be here. I appreciate your work so much and all the poets you bring to these conversations.